And Jamar, right? And we're live. What's up? What's up? I asked you a few seconds ago if your name's Jamar, but now I'm seeing the PhD at the end and wondering if I should call you Dr. Tisby. Which is better?
I appreciate that. Yes, I put that in the bio because I work hard for that. So I want to make
Absolutely.
sure people remember.
Absolutely, and you should get the recognition. I mean, we need more Black academics. Right now, we're seeing so many attacks. Obviously, as our Substacks have reported on a lot, attacks on Black history, attacks on Black academics. So I'm gonna call you Doctor from now on. How are you
Great.
doing? How are you doing, Doctor?
I'm doing well. It's early in the morning where I am, Pacific time, but no better reason to get up and get going with this conversation. I got to say, I'm a big admirer of yours, man. You've been taking the Substack streets by storm. It's been fun to see.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I'm excited. I think one thing that we can do in this conversation is talk a little bit about our process on Substack and how we approach it. One quick teaser into like what I'll discuss is that coming from TikTok, so for anyone who doesn't know, I was mainly a TikToker for the past few years. One thing you realize is that quantity matters a lot on these platforms with the algorithms. And I think that that's something that Substack kind of was like the culture of Substack was more quality over quantity, I think, in the past. And then after the TikTok ban, all the TikTok refugees came in. I think the company sort of realized that there is a lot of value in the quantity, like TikTok approach. So we'll get into that. But I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you as like the number one name in Black history on the platform, always charting a course. I was glad to see that you weren't a Clarence Thomas type because there's a lot of those out there, and who knows? For all we know, like
Wow.
A Thomas Sowell type of person could have been number one, but I'm very glad it's you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just want to start maybe like describe how you got on Substack. Like, what's your story of joining the platform?
First of all, you're not just a TikToker. Like you're killing the game over
Thank
there. My
you.
gosh. So very well done. I'm watching folks like you because you're sort of a digital media native and you speak this language so much more fluently. I'm an academic trying to be public facing, and so we have a lot to learn if we're willing to listen. So I really appreciate you initiating this live and this conversation. Like I said, I've been watching you, following you, subscribed, all that stuff. So all that to say, this is incredible, y'all. You tuning in right now, you're watching history in the making, Black history writers and creators on Substack. How'd I get into it? Honestly, it goes back to 2013 when I started a blog.
Oh wow.
Yeah, man. I've always been a writer. Thanks to my mom. She was an English teacher in high school, and she always made sure that we had our writing on point because writing is thinking. So she wanted to
Mhm.
make sure we were clear thinkers. So I've always had this thing for writing. I started my own blog in 2013. I kept up with it, maybe a year or two or whatever, but then life be lifing, and I was doing other things. And then in January 2021, I believe it was. I had been hearing about this thing called Substack, and I was like, well, I want to write. I want to write short form. I want it to be quick. I want it to be mine. Oh my gosh, the landscape of legacy media has changed so much in the past 5 and 10 years. So I wanted my own platform, and the thing that appealed to me most, our own community.
Mm.
Like, to me, this wasn't just about me pushing out thoughts. It was about gathering together like-minded people to have a conversation that wasn't dependent on an algorithm or whether you happen to scroll by and stop. This was going straight to your inbox and it was ongoing. So now
Mm.
I've got folks who've been subscribing, 3, 4 years, and it feels like a genuine community in that sense.
Wow, I love that story. And you've been in the game for a while, so I think I have a lot to learn. 2013, I think I made my first Instagram account back in 2013. So
Nice.
very far away from the blogs though. But I wish that I had known about platform. I don't know if Substack specifically was back then was a lot like created back then, but I do think a lot of young people would benefit from being aware that social media is not just like these pictures and images and crazy viral videos, but places where there are writers, where there are thinkers. Because I think the internet gets a bad rep. Like people don't assume that academics are leading the charge in community building, are the number one writers on platforms and on websites. I started back in TikTok in 2021 on Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Mm,
The FBI's Twitter account had posted Happy MLK Day. And it was one of my professors, Beverly Gage. She had wrote a book about J. Edgar Hoover. And she uncovered some files and wrote in the New York Times. And now it's like well-known knowledge that the FBI tried to get MLK to commit suicide, like through blackmail. So I made my first video about that, and that took off like instantly viral. And it's almost like I don't know, I think there's merit to the approach that TikTok and other social media accounts have, but I would say it's also a little bit maybe even toxic in that like I can't say that my initial thought was I'm going to build community with TikTok. My initial thought is if I put out more videos, it'll get people to watch. People will learn from it, but I'll just like be able to grow my following, grow my following, grow my following because it's so heavily incentivized on that
mm,
number of like views. So I just started telling more bite-sized stories of history, of shocking facts, and that ended up growing. And it was actually after maybe like a few months that I started getting some form of critical acclaim or news coverage that I realized, okay, it's not just actually like entertaining, shocking, educational stories, but it's stories that are having an impact on how people view the country and the world. And I started to lean more into that and do more longer form and care less about the views and more about
mm.
the stories that I was telling. And that was to my own benefit. I mean, as you mentioned, I've been able to do this for many years. And I actually transitioned to Substack at the beginning of this year when the TikTok ban was being discussed because I wanted a platform where I could do more community building, write more long form, not have to like forsake any nuance for the most viral take on social media. And that's what I found here. I mean, I've really enjoyed this platform. I've really enjoyed seeing people like you thriving and being subscribed to your newsletter. So I have a faith that I'm able to sort of go in the direction that you started out with of seeing social media more as community building and education than as a place for virality. But I think as a Gen Zer, our brain chemistry is a little bit messed up from the algorithm.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I will say to your point that you can actually start to shape conversation. Like we gloss over that word influencer, and it's almost like a bad word if for some people. But if you really break it down, it means to influence people. And that's I think exactly what you were able to do through TikTok is through these short form videos, which is meeting people where they are. This is how folks consume information these days. And being educated, informing them, you then influence the way they thought about certain things, right? You influence the way they thought about the relationship between MLK and the FBI and any number of issues that you're talking about. And then what's been so interesting with you is to see you bring some of that TikTok audience over to Substack because they wanted the community aspect. You know, different platforms have different strengths, right? And so this one with Substack, you're able to have a more ongoing conversation with people. But it's interesting that the folks who are on Substack, many of them, I would assume, have followed you over to Substack for that very reason. They want more. They want more of your knowledge, more of your conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I do is almost, or what I'm aiming to do is after every Substack, I make a video for social media that's like 1 minute. And at the end, I'm like, and if you want more, go visit my Substack,
Brilliant.
historycan'thide.substack.com. So I try to like add, I have like a little bit of a network going. I will say something else that I sort of brought over from like the creator economy is just like, I mean, being a content creator is a business. It's my full-time job. I don't have something else that I do. I will say
Awesome.
Substack is not necessarily my full time. I want Substack to be my full time thing specifically, but like right now, it's just content creation in general. So for content creation, like so what I have for Substack, for example, I have like research assistants that are college, like well, it's kind of my friend, but like also a college student who studies history and political science that helps with like excavating the sources, both primary and secondary, so that I can like read them, but they're all there, and I could just like rapid fire out some content. And I also have a backlog of stories, so that always helps.
Mm,
What I do for my Substack articles a lot of the time is that there's something that happens. So let's say Donald Trump, let's say Alligator Alcatraz, right? Like they're building up a concentration camp in the Everglades and they're joking about feeding people to alligators. Well, one of my first ever videos was talking about how like white hunters use black babies as alligator bait. Um, at least there's reports of this, and there's many articles in the Jim Crow, the Ferris University's Jim Crow Museum. People try to debunk it, but then the original author said like there's like refuted those claims that it was absolutely reported and probably true. And then also universities use the term gator bait from this history. So like I can merge that headline and explain what's going on and then go into the history afterwards, which is something that I think also helps like having a library, almost like a database of content that I've already made that I can just transfer over. A lot of times the sources are already there and cited. So I just go back and just gotta refresh my memory. I'm curious to know like how would you describe like your niche within history or Black history or political commentary? Like what defines the Dr. Tisby way on your Substack?
that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. Faith, history, justice, with an explicit focus on racial justice. That's sort of my lane. And I came to this sort of sideways, right? Like I didn't set out from college or something to be a PhD historian. I really went and got my graduate degree so that I could do this commentary on faith and justice with something of substance to say. One of the things that's really frustrating is there are people who will reference history who don't really study history, and that's okay. I want people to access history, but I also want some of the public voices to be historians.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, I just put up a reel on Instagram that it was a stitch. There was a video of a black pastor who was saying, "Here's the one moment when black people started to vote Democratic." And he pinned it to the phone call that JFK made to Coretta Scott King when MLK was in Birmingham jail.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he was making an interesting point, I think, about the influence of black churches. But what I said in my stitch was whenever you should be wary whenever someone says this is the one moment, the one person, the one event that changed everything.
Mm-hmm.
Because history is all about context and there's always precursors, there's always a bigger web of things that's going on. So that is an illustration of the ways historians can help in the broader conversation. And so when I went and got my PhD, it was never really to be like a tenure track professor. I wanted to be able to do a lot of what you just described, which is take a headline and say there's a longer story to this. As historians say, everything has a history.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important because as we're discussing, the algorithm does incentivize saying like this is a one like more outlandish, declarative arguments that like pinpoint a large consequence to a very small moment because that's what you can fit in a 1 minute story. So there's a lot of incentive to that, which is like kind of a disservice, I think, to the point that you're making about like the philosophy in the field of history and investigative journalism. um, but I mean, that's what we have these longer platforms for. I mean, between YouTube and Substack, there is a lot of room to fit more information that you can't do on something like TikTok and Instagram. And you were saying that you do faith as well. Like, so I mean, I noticed already, but I'm curious if you want to talk more about like how I'm assuming, I mean, pretty obviously Christianity influences like your
Right.
work and your perspective. And then also, I mean, I know you wrote about it, but like, I want you to give me a quick take on your opinion of sinners too. After
Oh my,
you start.
yes. The Sinners movie. Oh man. Well, we did a whole Sinners movie syllabus in conjunction with the African American Intellectual Historical Society, their blog Black Perspectives. So first of all, there's a biographical connection with me and the setting of Sinners. So
Mm,
the Sinners movies takes place in Clarksdale, Mississippi, 1932. That's in a region called the Mississippi Delta, which is a floodplain along both sides of the Mississippi River, extending from Memphis down to New Orleans. I lived 30 minutes north of Clarksdale right after college. I joined Teach for America. They assigned me to the Mississippi Delta. I was on the Arkansas side in Phillips County. Clarksdale was the big city for us. My town was like 10, 12,000. Clarksdale was like 34,000. So
wow.
we would go down there all the time, crossroads of the blues, great barbecue. The blues club down there is Ground Zero Blues Club, Morgan Freeman's place. They have a street blues festival. So
No
I know
vampires,
that
though, right?
place.
No
No,
vampire.
not that I know of, and I haven't invited anyone into the house.
That's good.
And I was so gratified to see a grassroots campaign to get a screening of the Sinners movie in Clarksdale, Mississippi, because
Mhm,
folk don't know the history. So Mississippi is the poorest, blackest region of both Mississippi and Arkansas.
mhm,
And at one time, Mississippi, in one part of the Delta region, had the most millionaires per capita of any place in the United States
wow.
because the Delta is the Delta because folks came and had cotton plantations.
Yeah.
So that's the history of it. All that flooding of the Mississippi River left this incredible soil for growing cotton, and white slave owners got incredibly wealthy, but their enslaved laborers didn't. And then after emancipation, of course, you have other forms of unfree labor, like in the Sinners movie, when they're driving down that dirt road, they pass this chain gang,
Mhm,
probably convict leasing, right? And so another way of exploiting the labor of Black people, as well as the fact that in the 1950s, then you get mechanization. So you have convict leasing. You also have sharecropping, and that's a form of debt peonage.
mhm.
One of the other really cool parts of the Sinners movie. There's this conversation they have about plantation money,
Yeah.
also called script. That was a real thing, and it was so diabolical because these Black sharecroppers would work the land, plant the soil, till it, weed it, harvest the crops, everything, and at the end they were supposed to get money, a share of the profits, right? And then what plantation owners would do is they would pay them, but they wouldn't pay them in US dollars. They would pay them in plantation money, which they could only use at the plantation commissary. So they would go to their own uh, plantation owner, give them back their own that plantation money, which was not good anywhere else, even on different plantations. And so Black people wouldn't get any real wealth, and the white plantation owner wouldn't lose any real wealth. So there's so many layers to Sinner's movie. What were some of the things that stuck out to you?
Actually, hmm, I always am very interested in, like, religion in the Black community. Last year, I did a, digital docuseries on YouTube with National Geographic. It was my first, like, partnership like that
Oh my
ever.
gosh.
And
So
out yeah, very, very cool. One of each episode, we went to a different city and then talked about, like, 4 or 5 different stories related to, like, marginalized history within that city. So one of them was we went down to New Orleans, and we looked at, like, voodoo and the history of voodoo and how it was formed and created and also demonized both within the city and within the larger United States and the larger Black community. So I found the commentary about religion to be really fascinating. Um, Especially also because I always wanted to, like, do a study of, like, Christianity in Africa and how it
mm,
arrived to at least our ancestors. Like, I think Ethiopian Christianity is a very far away thing and a very different thing, in my opinion. So, like, I'm always interested in, like, how it arrived in West Africa. And I went to Angola a few years ago and visited the first church there, which was one of the first, if not the first church in quote unquote sub-Saharan Africa. So I found that to be, like, really cool and interesting to see how each character has a different relationship to Christianity. I don't think it was like a black and white, like, saying that it's either bad or good, because I think there's, like, positive traits of it that are expressed in the movie and negative traits of it that are expressed in the movie. Um, and I think also seeing, like, the diversity of, like, the Irish colonization history being discussed, and then also like the Choctaw and the Mississippi Delta.
Yes.
I think those things stood out to me.
And the Chinese in the Delta was an
Hmm.
incredibly perceptive on the part of Ryan Coogler and the filmmakers. You had asked about religion in the film. One of the things that I thought is just my interpretation
Hmm.
was they were setting up a contrast between more indigenous religion like voodoo and hoodoo and
Hmm.
more religion that was external like Christianity
Hmm.
and in the film, what really had power was, the voodoo and the hoodoo. So, I think that was a commentary on what's actually authentically ours and versus, what, the oppressor may have it foisted on us or introduced us to. Now, historically, that story's much more complex, but in my viewing of it, the religion that really had power, it was set up that it wasn't necessarily Christianity. It was these other spiritual forms which had, in their view, a more direct tie to African history, the continent of Africa, and carried over to North America.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think maybe I agree with that. Like I watched it like 7 times now, so I I probably like am deluding myself into like reading deeper into things that are probably just like not that deep. But I think I've definitely had that perspective like the first few times, and then I saw this like pastor. It was a white pastor. He like had a whole YouTube video about how Sinners was anti-Christian, and then I was reading the comments of that, and people were like defending the movie's take on Christianity and saying that like Christianity is presented to have some power, if not like miraculous power, at least power through wisdom, and that like all the people that went to church were fine the next day. Um, the dad was like more or less like, I mean, yeah, he was trying to coerce Sammy into being a pastor like himself, but it's not that he was wrong, and it's not that he didn't have like the wisdom and the insight, whether it's divine or not, to like avoid the situation entirely. And then on the flip side, like I think hoodoo and voodoo have like miraculous, like sort of supernatural presentation and power, but they also fail at times. Like Annie, she couldn't save her child. She
Mhm.
couldn't save herself. She couldn't save anyone other than Smoke. So like there's a bit of a tit for tat and a yin and yang presented for both forms of spirituality, and that like they benefit the characters in some ways and they lose they fail the characters in some ways. But I do think it
Yeah.
leans towards saying that like the indigenous spiritualities at least have like this miraculous supernatural power that's presented very much
That's a
so.
good take. No, I think that's a good take, and I didn't think it was anti-Christian.
Yeah,
Like, to me, that would be too strong of a sentiment,
exactly.
um, but there was definitely a contrast presented, it appeared,
Yeah.
and I was glad that they even went there, like, the movie didn't have to go there, and it to me, it would have been, a much shallower plot if they hadn't had those themes there. I mean, obviously, it's already talking about the supernatural with vampires, right? But
Yeah.
also, religion is really just in the soil, in the air, in the atmosphere of the Delta, if you ever go down there, it's
Mhm.
just part of the culture. There are so many places in the country where it's like so tentative to bring up anything religion or spiritual. Like, is this okay? Can we talk about this? It's not polite conversation. Yo, not in the Delta. Like
Mm.
within the first 2 minutes of meeting someone, they're gonna ask you where you go to church or something of that nature. Right after they ask you who's your kin, who you related to. I mean, it is the South South.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, I've never been. I mean, New Orleans is like that far south geographically, but I don't think it's like enough of a contained culture to like really like scream the South in terms of like the cultural practices and norms. So I definitely want to go down to a place like that. Yeah, I don't think I've ever actually been somewhere like that in my life, but that sounds really interesting and exciting to like
It
explore.
is. Let me know when you go. I'll show you all the good spots.
Oh yeah, I mean, we could plan a trip and we have Substack, have our subscribers fund it.
Oh, that
You
would be
guys want to
amazing.
subscribe, please do. That's how we can do more projects like that. But yeah, I mean, we're like at 30 minutes, but I just want to like let me see if there's of course, commentators and commenters, feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat. Because we want to let's just open up maybe for a Q&A. for these
And I
events.
got some, I got a million questions for you, but just
Yeah, feel
like, was there a reason why because you started out with, like, TikTok and video, is there a big YouTube presence for you as well, or you made a concerted effort to come to Substack, and why might that be?
I want to be on YouTube. YouTube is just such a heavy lift of work and labor,
Mm,
and like Substack, TikTok and Instagram give you instant gratification in that. Like TikTok and Instagram give you instant gratification from how many people see it. And then Substack gives you instant gratification that people are directly paying you. So like like you can sustain the work. Whereas YouTube, there's at least for most people a 2 to 3 year, if not longer, lag where
wow.
like there's literally no feedback. Like you're not getting good views, you're not getting paid for it. You just have to like slowly build up your audience and sort of cross your fingers in hopes that the consistency will like pay off. And I just never found a time where like that sort of investment long term makes sense and like outweighs the sort of gratification that I would get from either like a viral video or increasing my like subscriber count so I can sustain myself.
Mm.
But I want to carve out time to like slowly start developing YouTube. And it's been something I've been telling myself I'm going to do for years, but it's just such a heavy lift.
Well, I'm excited that you're on Substack because as much as it's multimedia and we can do video like this, I think it still has the soul of a writer's community,
Hmm.
and that really lends itself to historical analysis and nuance and layers of detail that it's hard to do in another medium and certainly hard on another platform. So I'm really glad you're over here. I also wonder what advice you would give to academics like me, who, might be a generation older. We didn't grow up certainly with something like TikTok or even Instagram came along later. Like we had Facebook was the thing for our social media platform. I'm actually doing a lot more digitally than most scholars, but
Yeah.
what would you say to me or someone like me to utilize these new tools in digital media better?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think one thing that I noticed stands out on Substack quite a lot. I wouldn't say it's like you specifically, but a lot of people on Substack, I don't want to say it's like pretentious. I think it's like somewhere between pretentious and authentic, and that like they write for themselves, right? They'll have an essay and they'll name it a butterfly a butterfly's thoughts at 4 p.m. or something like that, which is like really cool and like I think it's artistic and people might click on that. But I think there's a world in which like you think about audience at every stage of the creation process, which is how
Mm.
like creators on other platforms think about it. So I like my article names like are very layman. Like you're not gonna like there's nothing that is really like you have to think too hard about so you before you click it. Like 129 dead in Texas floods, MAGA
Mm.
politics are to blame. Um, how alligator Alcatraz exposes 200 years of indigenous erasure. Trump claims he's fighting anti-Semitism, then he uses a 500-year-old slur. Let me see. The people who invented lacrosse can't play at the Olympics. Like I try to be very straightforward with
So
a
good.
lot of my
Yep.
work, so as not to confuse the audience. And then when I actually write it, like I have headers after every like two paragraphs, like
Mm.
next two paragraphs are gonna say, and the paragraphs are not even that long anyways. I have images shown and then I caption all the images. Of course references at the bottom, but like I make it so that it's readable and that like the readability of it for my audience is the number one thing I'm thinking about. Only secondary to like the content being good in and of itself. But I find that a lot of Substackers like I think I see notes every once in a while where it's like, oh, like if you're on sorry, I'm like I accidentally opened up the live on my thing as we were talking. But I see a lot of Substack notes are like, if you're here not to like not for an audience because you want to write for yourself, like this note and we'll like find our community. And I'm like, hey, that's great. Like feel free to like write for yourselves. But like at that point, like you're I don't know, it's like why do it on the public platform then at all? Like
So
I'm not
good. Yeah.
but that's not to judge, but that's just to say that like, yeah, the number one thing I think that separates my generation, like my approach to social media to like generally like the academic or older generation's approach is that I lose all sort of pretentiousness and like write for my audience and however they want to absorb the information as opposed to writing for myself and like just seeing what happens.
Oh, that's so good. That's such a perceptive observation. I think you're right on. I think part of it is stemming from when Substack first, it was just writing. So there was no Substack Live, there was no notes, there was no video option. And so the first wave or two of people who came over for that reason, that it was a stripped down thing. It wasn't like I have to learn a whole new platform. I have to learn video editing. I have to look good on camera. I have to feed the algorithm so that people
Mhm.
can see this. And so they were like, it was like refreshing that you could just come here, write, slowly build a community. There was a purity to it almost,
Yeah.
that you couldn't get elsewhere. And I think with, especially with the introduction of notes, which feels like another, Twitter, what used to be Twitter kind of a thing, that people are feeling that crunch again and that pressure. So that's
Yeah.
the other thing. Like people in my generation, it's like so hard. It's so hard to break through the noise. They say you need to be on social media, especially like if you want to write books or things of that nature. You have to have a following and a platform, and it's only gotten more difficult over the years to build a platform, even if you have good things to say. It, like you're saying about YouTube, it could take years for it to grow. And so I think people were wanting a place online in a digital media space where they didn't feel that pressure. So that's there. But also, writers can be extremely pretentious, extremely like, hoity toity and just, yeah. So that is definitely present in this conversation as well.
Yeah, in a weird way, it's almost like the immigration debate. It's like we're like they literally called us the TikTok refugees, right? Like we're coming
Uh-huh.
in, we're changing things, we're taking their jobs. No, but like, yeah, like you
Wild.
mentioned the word purity, like not like I mean, I'm like very much mapping a dynamic that's like not exactly what you're saying, like just for sort of the shits and giggles. But like when you said the word purity, I was like, oh, that's so funny. It's like the purity of like of Substack that like used to be, and then now like we're kind of like bringing in our own traditions and our own culture into it. Once again, very much putting words in your mouth and ideas and
That is
ideas
hilarious. No, you're
to a
extending
certain
it.
extent, but yeah, it's sort of like that. Like we're coming in, we're changing a lot of things. The platform is like conforming the economics of it all to benefit us because we bring in more money, like for honestly less cost to them because we're so used to churning out content for free. Um,
Mhm,
so yeah, I mean, I can only hope that like Substack carves out a way for both sort of perspectives to coexist. But I only imagine though that they will sort of favor the way that like the sort of TikTok content creators are moving things because we generally like generate a lot of money, especially if Substack changes to like an ad revenue model where they like start showing ads, which I can only imagine going to do soon because it just also generates more money. Then I think that they'll unfortunately lose a lot of that like original audience. But
mhm, mhm,
yeah, we'll
mhm.
see. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say because they champion themselves off of like the authenticity and sticking to like the core values, but like every platform does that until they turn into a complete like different version of themselves.
It's a business.
Exactly. It is. And can I ask, like, is Substack your main thing then, like as a business, or
It really is. It's my main thing. I have multiple sources of, revenue and, but Substack is my main thing because A, I love writing, and I'll always be a writer in some way, shape, or form, and, B, because of that community aspect, right? Like, that you're in people's email inboxes, but you can also respond to them in the comments and everything like that. So, I hope like it's a gamble. Like, I don't have recently stepped down from, my position at, a college so that I could do this more centrally and more full
wow.
time, and so this is why, Substack subscribers, it's a lifeline, and it allows us as, people who are, historians and want to influence a conversation in a positive way, really allows us to do what we do. So I thank all the folks who are subscribing to both of our Substacks. If you haven't subscribed to his, do it. If you haven't subscribed to mine, do it. Um, so yeah, it really is the main thing, especially now, because the stuff that I talk about, faith, justice, history, folk don't want to talk about that no more.
Mhm, mhm.
Like, I used to get speaking invitations fairly frequently That calendar is sparse now because even if an institution isn't against racial justice, let's say, they don't want to become targets for this
Mhm.
regime. They don't want to be labeled woke or whatever it might be. So that puts even more emphasis on platforms like Substack to make a living and to be an outlet for truth, like beyond just the make a living part. This is an outlet for truth, especially in the history category. So it's critical, y'all. We're in a moment of crisis.
Yeah, I just wanna make something very conspicuous. I'm gonna pull it up really quickly, but there is a chart for the top historians or the top history newsletters on Substack. Um, and if I'm looking at, like, the top bestsellers or, like, the honestly, the rising even, a lot of them, if not a majority, are way more like, they're conservative like, writers, like, The Culturist. I like The Culturist, don't get me wrong, like, they make cool content about, like, "masterpieces," quote, unquote, but their whole thing is just, like, reinstilling the supremacy of Western culture, Western art, as if it's ever been, like, suppressed, but their whole thing is, like, the value and the beauty of Western art and, like, the importance of coming back to Western values, right? Daryl Cooper, I know he made a lot of appearances on Joe Rogan. He's known for his sort of Holocaust takes, that position Winston Churchill as the same level as, if not worse than Hitler within that sort of geopolitical conflict of World War II. And also at least seemingly leans conservative in a lot of the takes, or at least leans a conservative audience. Curtis Yarvin,
Mm.
Elon's best friend, is actual techno monarch who believes that there should be a separation of the races and that races have different intellects and that's something that should be factored into public policy and law, and so on and so forth. So like we're actually out here competing with like specifically when we're talking about Curtis Yarvin, like the worst of the worst. I would say anyone
Yes.
who doesn't know who Curtis Yarvin is, read the New Yorker profile on him. He's like actually like a horrible, horrible, horrible person. I can say that comfortably about him. The other ones are just like more conservative generally. So yeah, we need all the support we can get. Subscribe, and I'm gonna be very specific. Paid subscriptions do the best and help us the most. So feel free to do either the 1 year, however much for the founding member, or just the monthly. But like those paid subscriptions really, really, really are important.
They are, they are. And I just wanna throw in a quick plug here, um, because we really about that life. So this Saturday, July 19th, I've partnered with the King Center in Atlanta for a live online nonviolence training.
Wow.
Everybody keeps asking, "What do we do? What do we do in this moment? This regime, ICE is abducting people, all this stuff." People in the civil rights movement trained for this,
Hmm.
right? And I'm sure you've seen that, Khalil. And this is one of the things that we bring forward as students of history is like people didn't just get mad and then show up to march.
Hmm.
They trained, they went through introspection, they counted the cost. And what I'm inviting and encouraging people to do right now is to do the same thing. So it's a live online training. Saturday, July 19th, starts at noon Eastern. All the links are at my Substack, including the Substack that I posted today, which was based on a quote from Coretta Scott King, who never gets her due. But you can follow all the details and register there. I would love to see as many of you possible join us for that live. I'm going to be a student too, so I can't wait to learn this.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Please, everyone, make sure you join that. Saturday. I'll be traveling to Morocco, but otherwise, I would have joined.
Bruh, the life you live, man,
Yeah,
and
I'm
we're just
excited.
getting started. It's
Yeah,
wild.
I try. I'll just give a bit of context on that. I do a lot of local history, but I also want to branch into international history. I mentioned Angola. And one thing I'm really interested in is like the history of the Moors because they're like very mythologized in the Black American community. And like, I think the real story of them is really fascinating and can hopefully break through some of the myths. But I'm going to the northern Morocco where they set sail to take over Spain, where North Africans took over Spain. And then when Spain was reconquered by the Catholic Church, where they were evicted too. So really
Good
interesting.
Lord. That is brilliant. That is
Thank you
awesome.
so
I
much.
cannot wait.
But yeah, nice to meet you finally. Thank you everyone in the
Yes.
comments. Feel free once again, subscribe, paid subscription, either of our channels, and hopefully we can set something like this up again sometime soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for the great conversation.
Of course. Bye.